They drew the lines, I crossed them all. Built their tower, I let it fall. Too loud, too bold, too wild to tame. They cursed my heart, then spoke my name. Let them whisper, let them frown. I was never meant to bow down. Call me chaos, call me shame, but I wear this crown without your name. So pour the tea and spin it round. The villain's here in a crooked crown.
What happens when you stop following the rules that ask you to feel less and fall into the world that dares you to feel everything? In this powerful new series of Wonderland Unlocked, we meet Courtney standing at the edge of exile. She's spent her whole life in a kingdom ruled by emotional silence, her father's kingdom, where feelings are forbidden and masks of perfection are worn tighter than crowns. But something inside her refuses to go numb. Her heart still beats too loud, her grief still aches, her joy still dares to shine. And when the weight of being too much becomes unbearable, she slips, literally and metaphorically, into Wonderland. But this Wonderland isn't a place of riddles and whimsy. It's a reflection of everything she's buried, forgotten, or been told to hide. Wonderland isn't an escape. It's an unraveling, a remembering, a becoming. And her crooked crown? It's the only thing that doesn't disappear, because it was never the problem. It was the proof. In Chapter 1, Courtney lives under the rule of a king who fears emotions. Her father in this kingdom, sorrow is weakness, joy is dangerous, and tenderness is treason. As her inner world grows louder, she's threatened with exile. Her crown, handmade and colorful, is mocked and unruly and unfit for the throne. Rather than bend, she breaks free, falling through cracks of this rigid realm into a strange place that doesn't follow the king's rules. This is the beginning of her descent into Wonderland, a world that pulses with unfiltered feeling. In Chapter 2, The Chaotic Tea Party, Courtney lands hard, not gently, but something in that landing feels sacred. She finds herself in a forest that hums with memory, where the mud clings and the moss listens. Wonderland isn't whimsical here. It's wild, messy, and deeply emotional. This chapter is where Courtney starts meeting the versions of herself that her old world labeled as too much, too loud, too sensitive, too broken. But here in this chaotic, swirling tea party of inner truth, those parts aren't flaws. They're medicine. Each teacup holds a memory. Each guest speaks in riddles, but the kind that feel like mirrors. So let's get started in Chapter 3. Chapter 3, Whispers of the Ancient Trees. Leaving behind the chaos of the tea party, I wandered into a dense forest, its canopy woven from the shades of emerald and jade. The air here was thick, with the scent of damp earth and ancient wood, and noticeably calmer than the emotionally charged whirlwind I just escaped. The trees hummed with a quiet energy, their leaves rustling in a breeze that felt like a balm in my frayed nerves. It was a stark contrast to the overwhelming sensory overload I just endured, a refuge where the noise of raw emotion gave way to the gentle murmur of nature. Towering trees surrounded me, their trunks broader than any I had ever seen. Their bark was etched with the passage of time, like nature's own archive. Some were twisted and gnarled, their branches clawing toward the sky like ancient hands. Others stood tall and proud, their leafy crowns painted symphonies of green against the blue sky. From them emanated a quiet wisdom, a peace so old and enduring. It settled deep into my bones. I felt a kinship with these silent sentinels. Their weathered presence reflected the storm I carried inside. As I ventured deeper, the atmosphere subtly shifted. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting dappled patterns on the forest floor, flecks of light dancing across patches of shadow. The air grew cooler, scented with pine and moss, and the soundscape became a soft lullaby. The rustle of leaves, birdsong from somewhere unseen, the occasional patter of raindrops on the canopy above. It was a world entirely separate from the tempest I left behind. Then I came upon a tree unlike any other. It stood larger than the rest, its bark a patchwork of colors and textures, as if it were the stories of centuries in plain sight. I reached out and traced my fingers across its rough surface. There was comfort in its age, in its rootedness. A quiet peace settled over me, like the forest had exhaled and invited me to rest. I sat at its base and leaned back, letting my breath slow. Eyes closed, I let the sounds and smells of the forest wrap around me. The turmoil of the tea party, the voices, the chaos, the emotional noise began to fade. This wasn't just a change of sensory. It was a return, a grounding, a reconnection to something older, something deeper. And then, I felt it. A hum, soft and steady, began to pulse from the tree behind me. It resonated in my chest like a distant drumbeat. It felt like a whisper, not of words, but of understanding. Through that vibration came flickers of memory, not of my own, but inherited. Faces I'd never met, moments from a time long gone, glimpses of family, of forgotten histories, of the kingdom's roots. All of it flowed into me like stories on the wind, quietly shared by the tree that had seen it all. The images were unclear, but they stirred something deep within me. Fleeting and fragmented, they hinted at a larger story, one passed down through generations, woven into the fabric of the kingdom's history and my own family's legacy. The trees weren't just trees. They were living archives, vessels of memory. Their roots held not just the soil, but the emotional history of all who had walked these paths before me. I could feel it all: joy, sorrow, rage, tenderness, fear, woven together like the branches overhead. The emotions clung to the forest like mist, lingering in the air. These trees didn't merely reflect the past, they shaped the present. Their wisdom reached forward like vines, influencing the path ahead with quiet intent. Their serenity wasn't passive, it was active, deliberate, a balm for wounds I hadn't known how to name. Here, amid the hush of ancient trunks and leaf-laced light, I began to sense the connection between my emotions and the natural world around me. The stillness of the forest mirrored the peace I craved. Its strength echoed my own capacity to endure, to heal, to grow. Each tree whispered a lesson. Emotions are not disruptions. They are cycles. Like the seasons, they rise and fall. Grief gives way to joy. Anger softens into understanding. The trees lose their leaves only to bloom again. So do we. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting gold shadow through the forest, a quiet understanding settled over me. The chaos of the tea party had forced me to face my inner storms. But the forest, with its calm, was where I could finally integrate those lessons. It didn't just offer peace, it offered perspective. This forest was more than a setting. It was a teacher, an ally. Its silence was full of meaning. Its breeze carried more than air. There were insights hidden in its hush, quiet truths about the nature of emotion and transformation. The deeper I listened, the more I understood. This place was not only watching me, it was guiding me. What I thought was an escape had become something else entirely. A communion, a merging of my inner landscape with the rhythms of the earth. Nature was not indifferent to my struggle. It responded. It soothed. It taught. And in that connection, I found hope. The forest stood with me, strong and ancient, reminding me that resilience is rooted, not loud. That healing can be slow, seasonal, and still sacred. The trees offered more than shade. They offered a symbol of what I could become. I spent hours in the forest soaking in its stillness, its wisdom, its unwavering presence. The ancient trees had become my confidants, silent guides along a path towards deeper self-understanding and emotional mastery. This forest was no longer just a place. It had become my sanctuary, a sacred space where I could reconnect with myself, make peace with the past, and gather the strength to face what lay ahead. It was a place of healing and growth, where the veil between the internal and the external seemed to thin. The whispers of the trees weren't merely sounds. They were messages. Nature's strength mirrored my own resilience. Its calm was a reflection of the inner peace I was only beginning to uncover. Though my journey was far from over, I was no longer walking in the dark. I was moving forward with new clarity, a sense of purpose I hadn't felt before. The forest hadn't handed me answers. It had illuminated the path to find them for myself. As twilight deepened, painting the forest floor in soft hues of amethyst and indigo, the whispers grew stronger. The ancient trees, their branches now arching like intertwined fingers, seemed to lean in closer, their silent communion becoming more intense. The fragmented visions from earlier began to sharpen, forming clearer, more vivid images. I saw a woman. Her face was carved with both sorrow and strength, her presence commanding yet tender. She moved through a garden bathed in a thorough light. Not of this world, but it wasn't filled with ordinary flowers. These blossomed pulsed with emotion, crimson roses that beat with anger, cerulean lilies radiating calm, golden sunflowers overflowing with pure, unfiltered joy. This woman, I realized, was a matriarch, an ancestor who had once wielded the same emotional magic I was once beginning to understand. Then the vision shifted. A confrontation. The woman stood firm, facing a cloaked figure made of a shadow. No face, no name, only presence. The figure pulsed with oppressive energy, the same force that had long shaped my life, the same weight that had once branded me a villain. But this wasn't a physical fight. It was a battle of emotional force, a struggle over the very soul of Wonderland. The shadow figure tried to silence the garden to smother the pulsing vibrancy of the emotional life. But my ancestor stood her ground. Her magic, rooted in self-love and generational strength, formed a radiant shield, pushing back the dark. And then, another vision, one that shifted everything. I saw Wonderland's origins, not as a whimsical place of randomness, but as something sacred, a world born of human emotion itself. Every twist of its logic, every burst of color or chaos was shaped by feeling, by the collective dreams, fears, and desires of those who had come before. It was never just fantasy. It was a mirror, a landscape of the soul made real. This revelation settled into me like truth. The emotional intensity I carried wasn't an anomaly. It was a bridge. I was connected to this world in ways deeper than I understood. Wonderland was not just influenced by emotion. It was emotion. Raw, wild, unfiltered, just like me. The next vision came gently. Children laughing and running through glowing garden. They played among the blooming emotions, their joy echoing through the trees. It wasn't just innocence, it was magic. These children were also my ancestors, their laughter a force that fueled Wonderland's very heartbeat. I realized then the emotions of every generation shaped this place. Their struggles carved its cliffs. Their love grew its flowers. Their pain warped its skies. Wonderland lived through us. And still, the visions came, unfolding like a story written in light and feeling. I saw moments of great love and heartbreaking betrayal, of unity and fracture, of power wielded both wisely and recklessly. Each memory was steeped in emotion, grief, fury, hope, forgiveness. And I felt all of them. I wept with their sorrow. I exhaled with their joy. It was an emotional baptism, cleansing something old inside me, not to erase it, but to integrate it, to finally understand. This tapestry of visions became more than history. It was identity. Every fragment revealed a piece of my family's truth, our struggles, our resilience, our part in Wonderland's creation. Our legacy wasn't shame, it was magic. And I, for the first time, no longer feared my emotional intensity. I honored it. I was ready to carry it forward, not as a curse, but as a gift. These glimpses into the past revealed what I had long sensed, but never fully understood. My family's history was not just connected to Wonderland. It was woven into its very fabric. My ancestors were not just mere inhabitants of this realm. They were its architects. Through their lives, emotions, and choices, they shaped the landscape itself. With this realization, the king's narrative, the one that painted me as a villain, shattered. I was not a rebellious outsider. I was an heir to a legacy far more complex, rich, and sacred than any accusation could define. My deep connection to Wonderland, the ease with which I channeled emotional energy, finally made sense. The magic here wasn't a foreign force. It lived inside me. It was in my blood, inherited, innate. This revelation was both exhilarating and sobering. Exhilarating because I finally understood the source of my power. Generations of emotionally gifted women who had shaped this world with fierce love and unyielding will. But sobering because I also felt the weight of what they carried. My ancestors had faced trials, endured loss, stood defiant in the face of suppression. Their pain echoed in my own, a story revealing a lineage marked not by villainy, but strength misunderstood. As dawn broke and the forest brightened in soft hues of rose and gold, the whispers of trees began to quiet. In their place became birdsong, gentle rhythmic grounding. The forest, once pulsing with mystery and magic, now felt like an extension of my own consciousness. I was no longer just resting in the woods. I was the woods. My breath matched the rhythm of the earth beneath me. The weight of all I had seen and felt did not vanish, but it transformed. The burden of inherited trauma had been tempered by the knowledge of inherited resilience. I no longer saw myself as a burden. I saw myself as becoming. My journey through Wonderland was never just about physical escape. It was about confrontation with my inner landscape. The chaotic tea party with its emotional chaos had broken something open in me. The ancient forests had helped me stitch it back together, not into what I was before, but into something stronger, something whole. The trees hadn't just whispered my history, they had given me a mirror, a revelation, my family's legacy, its magic, its pain, its triumph was inseparable from the land. Wonderland wasn't just a metaphor. It was the physical embodiment of emotion, the human experience laid bare. And in that way, it reflected a deeper truth. Our emotions shape our reality, whether in a magical realm or our everyday lives. Feelings ripple outward. They build. They destroy. They create worlds. The ancient trees were more than memory keepers. They were teachers. They showed me that emotion isn't a flaw. It's a force. Not something to be feared or tamed, but to be understood. Just like the seasons, emotions cycle. Joy gives way to grief. Sorrow births compassion. Anger becomes change. My ancestors had not tried to silence these cycles. They had honored them. They had guarded them. That image, the garden bathed in emotion, returned to me again and again. My ancestors had cultivated more than magic. They had cultivated balance. Crimson roses of fury, lilies of peace, golden sunflowers of radiant joy. They didn't rip out any of the angry vines. They pruned them, shaped them, gave them space without letting them overgrow. Their emotional mastery was not about control. It was about relationship, reverence, wisdom. And so my path became clear. I was not meant to escape the villain label. I was meant to reclaim it, reshape it. I would no longer define myself by the accusations of a fearful king. I would define myself by truth, by legacy, by power rooted not in domination, but in deep understanding. The trees had shown me the truth. My power was not a curse. It was a continuation of something ancient and beautiful. The journey ahead would not be easy, but now I had the strength of every woman who came before me. I carried their echoes, their wisdom, their scars, and their songs. And with each step forward, I would no longer fear my emotions. I would walk with them, side by side. Because now, I understood what the whispers of the ancient trees had been telling me all along. I was never villain of the story. I was its evolution. The shadowy figure battling my ancestor wasn't just a villain. It was a symbol. A force representing emotional suppression. The relentless pressure to silence feeling, to sanitize authenticity. I realized then that this was not a threat confined to Wonderland. It was a reflection of a much older, real-world struggle. A societal force that had shaped my family's history for generations. It was this force that had mislabeled my ancestors as dangerous, unstable, or too much. It was this same force that had branded me a villain. The conflict that I had witnessed in this vision wasn't simply about good versus evil. It was about the right to feel, the right to exist without censorship, the right to express complex emotions without being reduced, dismissed, or feared. The weight of this realization settled into me like stone, but not with despair, with purpose. Emotional magic, I now saw, was not something to wield casually. It was sacred, and sacred things require reverence. These visions also had revealed a pattern, the cynical nature of emotional power passed down through my bloodline. Our moments of triumph and heartbreak, of kindness and pain, they weren't isolated. They were echoes in a generational rhythm. Each woman in my lineage had danced this dance facing the same pressures, hearing the same accusations, and making the same brave choice to keep feeling anyway. This wasn't just an historical insight. It was validation. My pain had context. My power had roots. And then, I saw her. A vision of a young girl, perhaps my great-grandmother, standing before a council of stone-faced elders. Her voice trembled, but her eyes held fire. She was being accused of witchcraft, her emotional magic misunderstood, feared. She wasn't shouting or pleading, she simply stood her ground. She didn't win the room with words, she won it with presence, with truth. And though the vision faded before her fate was clear, it didn't need to show more. I already knew. She was one of us. Fierce, misunderstood, unbending. Another vision followed, so tender it brought tears to my eyes. A woman walking into a community ravaged by grief. People broken by loss. And rather than fix them, she did something more radical. She listened. She felt with them. She didn't try to chase the sorrow away with forced joy. Instead, she held space for the grief to exist, to breathe, to move through them. Her emotional magic created a sanctuary, not a solution. And through that shared vulnerability, healing began. This was emotional power at its highest form. Not control, not manipulation, but empathy. A bridge between people. A way to transmute pain into growth. Watching her, I understood something vital. Emotional magic is not about bending feelings to your will. It's about honoring them, creating space for transformation, not imposing it. And with that came the full weight of what I had inherited. This legacy wasn't just a gift, it was a responsibility. Feel deeply is to live vulnerably. To wield emotional power is to be entrusted with something more potent than any weapon. Because emotions shape lives. They shape relationships. They shape entire worlds. And in Wonderland, they literally shape reality. This power could heal, but it could also harm. It could comfort, but it could also control. And that's why it demanded restraint, wisdom, compassion, integrity. I began to see the full picture. My magic wasn't just about showing the world who I could become. It was about showing the world who I already was. A steward of emotional truth. A guardian of feeling. A descendant of women who refused to be silenced, who stood their ground even when misunderstood. My family hadn't passed down just magic. They passed down courage. And now it was my turn. My understanding of Wonderland's history had grown beyond the bounds of whimsy and fantasy. This place wasn't just a magical realm, it was a mirror, a reflection of human emotion at its rawest, most powerful form. It held the legacy of my family not only in its stories but in its soil, in its air, and in its ever-shifting emotional terrain. The weight of this understanding was immense. The power I now held demanded something deeper than curiosity. It demanded responsibility, reflection, and restraint. The ancient trees, ever my silent mentors, remained constant. Their roots cradled centuries of emotional truth, their branches etched with lessons passed down wordlessly. Through their presence, I learned the essence of balance, joy, and sorrow, rage and serenity, passion and quiet resolve. The trees didn't teach me to control emotion by force. They showed me how to understand it, to honor it, and most importantly, to accept myself within it all. My journey wasn't over. In truth, it had only just begun. I was no longer just the girl accused of being a villain. I was a living testament to the generations of strength and struggle. A woman with legacy burning in her veins and growing mastery over an ancient, sacred magic. The whispers of the trees continued to guide me not with commands, but with encouragement. Their rustling leaves were a quiet reminder. Emotional power is not for dominance. It's for healing, for insight, for the creation of a world where feeling isn't feared, but embraced. Still, power is nothing without practice. My early attempts to wield emotional magic were clumsy. Like a toddler learning to walk, I stumbled, overcorrected, and sometimes unleashed more than I meant to. A flash of irritation might summon a sudden thunderstorm. A wave of delight might send shimmering fireworks bursting across the sky. Beautiful, yes. Practical, not exactly. The forest in its wisdom didn't offer step-by-step instructions. The guidance was subtle, patterns in the leaves, the way light filtered through the canopy, the way flowers bloomed or withered in response to my mood. It became a process of intuition. I started small, finding a patch of sunlight and cultivating a sense of calm until the blossoms around me glowed gold. Sitting on a field of blue roses, I meditated on melancholy, not resisting it, but letting it flow, letting it speak. The result? A soft mist rose, cooling and gentle, mirroring the quiet sorrow I had allowed to exist without judgment. I soon realized that the challenge wasn't in creating emotional manifestations. It was in refining them. A flicker of annoyance might become a candle flame. Unchecked rage, however, could threaten to set the entire forest alight. I had learned not just suppression, but precision, how to channel emotion with intention. I practiced crafting shields of calm, small sanctuaries of serenity. These emotional shelters became safe places where I could retreat when despair surged, using my energy not to escape emotion, but to steady it. And then I pushed myself further. I healed wounded animals with waves of calm. I stood beside weeping willows, heavy with despair, and offered quiet companionship until their leaves lifted again. I didn't force change, I held space for it. I extended compassion, not commands. I learned that the ethical use of emotional power wasn't about fixing others. It was about respecting their journey and offering support along the way. This wasn't just a magical transformation, it was personal. A reclamation of my identity, a rewrite of the story others had tried to trap me into. The king had labeled me a villain because he could not comprehend the beauty of what he feared. But I knew now, his fear wasn't truth. His judgment wasn't prophecy. My emotions weren't flaws. They were a gift. The more I mastered my power, the more I understood self-acceptance is the key. That was the real lesson Wonderland had for me. And through that acceptance, I didn't just discover who I was. I began to see how we as a people could shift our understanding of emotion altogether. But even with this newfound clarity, another lesson awaited: the necessity of boundaries. In the beginning, my emotions bled into everything around me: joy, sorrow, fear, all spilled out, coloring the world, impacting others unintentionally. I built havens of calm for myself, but that was only the beginning. True mastery meant learning to respect emotional space, mine, and others. The forest showed me this gently. Sunflowers thrived under quiet joy, but wilted under intense anger. The air itself would thicken with despair or lift with lightness. The world reacted not just to emotion, but to its boundaries or lack thereof. I began to understand feeling everything wasn't the goal. Feeling responsibly was. And so I practiced presence without possession. compassion without invasion, expression without eruption. Journey continued layer by layer, root by root. Understanding this interconnectedness illuminated the critical importance of setting boundaries. My emotional outbursts were more than inconvenient. They were disruptive, even dangerous. A wave of unchecked grief could wilt the surrounding flora, casting gloom over the entire forest. A surge of anger might splinter tree branches, send animals fleeing. Controlling my emotional expressions wasn't just about self-mastery anymore. It was an act of environmental stewardship. My early attempts at creating boundaries were rudimentary at best. I practiced crafting invisible walls of calm, barriers meant to shield me from the emotional noise of the world around me. I visualized a bubble of stillness and tried to exist within it, untouched by the anxiety or despair nearby. But it took immense concentration, and the moment my own emotions surged, the fragile wall would collapse, like trying to hold back a tidal wave with paper. I soon discovered that boundaries weren't just about building impenetrable walls. Emotions were static. They moved like water, falling around resistance, finding cracks, reshaping everything they touched. To block emotion completely was to invite disaster. The key wasn't resistance, it was redirection. Instead of damming the current, I began to guide it. I learned to manage expression rather than suppress emotion. A flicker of irritation didn't need to become a thunderstorm. A quiet breath, a shift in posture, a whispered word, it was enough. Likewise, a well of sorrow didn't demand complete collapse. I could channel that ache into something creative, painting, storytelling, silent reflection, turning pain into beauty, not destruction. This work required an unflinching gaze inward. I spent long hours alone in the forest, journaling, meditating, gently peeling back the layers of my emotional landscape. I tracked what triggered me, what soothed me, what made me feel seen or dismissed. Slowly, I created an emotional map, one where I could navigate with increasing clarity. And the better I knew this inner terrain, the easier it began to steer the storms before they swelled. But boundaries aren't only inward-facing. My early encounters with Wonderland's creatures were often too much, too intense, too overwhelming. I would rush to soothe their comfort, but my energy was too strong, too heavy. I meant well, but I often made things worse. A grieving creature needed space, not my sorrow layered on top of theirs. My desire to help could become a violation if I didn't approach it with gentleness and restraint. That's when I began to truly grasp the importance of emotional respect. It wasn't enough to control my power. I had to understand when and how to offer it. Not everyone needing saving. Not everyone wanted to be pulled into my emotional current. Some needed space to feel for themselves, to sit with their own truths about interference. The trees were my greatest teachers. I studied their root systems, intertwined yet separate. They formed collective, but each stood at its own being. They inspired what I came to call emotional etiquette, a quiet, evolving code for navigating the emotional world with integrity. I began approaching others with intention. I learned to soften my presence, to feel the emotional air before speaking. I offered calm instead of intensity, quiet support instead of urgent intervention. I didn't smother feelings with solutions. I created space where emotions could unfold naturally. One day I came upon a cluster of woodland creatures mourning a loss. Once I might have poured my own grief in solidarity, but this time I simply was with them. I conjured a gentle pocket of peace, a tranquil circle where they could cry, sit, breathe. My presence was no longer a storm, it was a shelter. That was the moment I truly understood. Boundaries are not walls. They are bridges built with care. They are doorways with locks we choose to open or close. They are the respectful space between I feel and you feel. The delicate art of being with someone without losing yourself, or overtaking them. Setting emotional boundaries is not a one-time lesson. It's a lifelong practice, one that requires patience, awareness, and compassion, both for myself and others. It's the art of tending to the garden of feeling without letting the vines outrun the space. These lessons didn't stay rooted in Wonderland. They followed me into every corner of my life, into conversations, into relationships, into how I saw myself. The whispers of the ancient trees became my compass, gently reminding me that the power without boundaries is chaos, but power with boundaries is transformation. What began as survival evolved into a stewardship. What began as silence became discernment. What once felt like a curse now felt like wisdom unfolding. In the end, the lesson of boundaries became just as essential as the magic itself. It wasn't just about controlling what I felt. It was about honoring what others felt too. It was about building a world where emotions could be held, safely, channeled responsibly, and shared with grace. And that, I realized, was the truest form of power I could ever possess. Until next time, friends!